behind some of the biggest influencer names in the industry, billion-dollar software companies, Kevin Richards. How do you go from wanting to make $38,000 a year to having $1 million cash in the bank?
It's that spark. It's that, but there's more. What everyone underestimates about success is the longevity in front of it, and probably the failures in between. There's just little decisions along the way.
How do you find a good partner in business, and what do you look out for?
As we go through different stories, from the very first startup to ClickFunnels just a year ago, the theme is the same.
On this show, you'll meet people who have gone from 6 figures in a year to 6 figures in a month, in a day, in an hour, and even a minute. You'll hear their story, the strategies that worked, the insights that changed everything, and the lessons they learned along the way.
This is the Six Fig Podcast.
Welcome to this episode of the Six Fig Podcast. I'm here with Kevin Richards, who has prolific experience in online marketing, co-founder of Buy.com. He's been behind the scenes, behind some of the biggest influencer names in the industry. What's a common thread that you can draw between all of the success as general business principles that we can all implement?
The number one thing that I've always seen is passion first. You know, you look at these entrepreneurs and business owners and all the partners in companies, and they're obsessed with a specific idea, and they're truly obsessed to the point that they don't see anything else. You know, distraction, I think, is the biggest enemy to successful companies. And that's the consistent theme that I've seen over the last 30 years is truly someone committed to their mission. And the more focused they are to that, the more success they end up having over time.
I love that. Let's go back 30 years in the making. Yeah. I mean, when did Kevin Richards become aware of this thing called entrepreneurship? Where did it all start?
Yeah, so I was an accidental entrepreneur because I was a college dropout. I didn't know what else to do, to be honest. And I had a good friend, had a business down in San Diego that I was inspired by. And just saw his business and the way he was running it and thought that seemed pretty easy. And so I convinced my dad to loan me a little tiny bit of money that I used for our wedding and then carved out a little bit of that to start a business. And I mean, a very little amount of money. I think we're talking like $3,000, like not a lot of money at the time, even then. And I started a small shop that was our first business. And we did it with a partner. And you'll see a consistent theme. Since I was 22 years old, I've had a partner in every single business I've ever done. And that was it. I didn't know anything about the business. I knew that he knew how to run it. So I figured I could learn and do it along the way. And I did the sales, I did the fulfillment, I did everything. And then he taught me how to run that business. And that was my very first entrepreneur business. It was literally a local, we were print pre-services. So like back in the day, you had to do film to do anything in print before there were digital printers. So we were just like the middleman of that process and just flipped out that all day long.
That's awesome. Yeah. I know that you have a pretty interesting story that probably a lot of people could relate to around some of the mindset you had around money in high school, even of, you know, if I could just make this amount of money, you know, life would be amazing. And so tell us a little bit about that and just kind of your humble beginnings too.
Yeah, I think we all have goals growing up. We have visions, you know. Originally, I wanted to be a fighter pilot, but turns out that probably wasn't the right plan. And my vision wasn't good enough. So I gave up on that pretty quick. I had a friend of mine who was a little bit older, and he was like the person I looked up to growing up. He was the guy who did everything right. He was quite a bit older, and he graduated from college and he got a job as like an accountant. And I remember the day he got the job, he told me, he's like, I make $38,000 a year. And for some reason, that number locked in my head. I was like 14, probably 15 at the time. I was like, that's my number. If I can make $38,000 a year, that's the rest of my life. And that was my concept. So when I went into college, even I just had this perception that all I needed to do, I didn't know to make more money. We didn't have all the information that we have now. I didn't realize what was possible. Even though I grew up in a very affluent neighborhood and I was surrounded by people that we were like the poorest people in a good neighborhood is basically how I described growing up by a substantial amount, but I didn't understand their world. I didn't have a mentor when I was young that was kind of showing me or expressing. I just saw all the things everyone had, but I didn't understand the math, how to get it. So that was where my world was. I, got out of high school, started college, and my head is like, I just want to have $38,000 a year. And that was everything for me.
That's awesome. I know a little bit about your story, so I might be jumping ahead a little bit, but how did you go from, in high school wanting to make $38,000 a year, 14, 15 to just a little over a decade later, having $1 million cash in the bank? Let's walk through that whole journey. There's pieces of this story and to unpack until we get there, but I know that, becoming co-founder of Buy.com, which at one point was the second largest online retailer in the entire world. Yep. Like that's an amazing feat. So how did that opportunity come about? And tell us about that journey and scaling that and going from having a goal to just make $38,000 in a year to being $1 million at the age of 28, I believe, right? Yep. And back when $1 million was $1 million. I mean, $1 million still isn't anything to sniff at today, but especially in the early 2000s, that's a crazy shift to go from I just want to make $38,000 in a year to having that type of money. And I know there's lots of things that we can unpack around money mindset, responsibility of not just making the money, but keeping growing the money, and we'll go from there. But yeah, tell us a little bit about that journey of Buy.com and that roller coaster or rocket ship ride, I guess we could say, and some of the lessons you learned along the way.
Yeah, really every bit of it. There's so many stories on stories on stories. They're all based around opportunities where you have a choice to make. And, like I said, dropped out of college, my sophomore year in college. So I didn't have traditional path. I didn't have, the usual path of internships or job. My job application was not going to be responded by a lot of people. So I had to be a little more creative. And that's what I ended up doing. So like I said, I started this first company, and company is a very strong word. I started this little business, and that was what I was doing. But I had one really good client. And that one really good client was about 50% of my revenue. It was the only way I was able to pay myself any money. But startup company, had no insurance. We were barely surviving. I think I paid myself, I would say probably $800 a month, maybe. And we were my wife and I, she was still in school. We were literally living off that barely. And, but that was all the money that was coming from this one main client. And they walked in one day, and the marketing director of that company walked in. He's like, "Hey, I got good news and bad news. The good news is, let's start with the bad news." He goes, "The bad news is we're taking all the work we do with you and we're bringing it in-house." He goes, "Oh, and there's a more bad news. I'm leaving the company." So I lost my main client, and he's leaving the company as well. He was actually going to work for another big company. It's like, "Oh, maybe I'll go get him as a client." He's like, "And we're not going to sign with you at the new company I'm going to." I said, "But there's a job opportunity if you want it." So like, "Do they have insurance?" He's like, "Yes." So the company was literally across the street from my office. I walked across the street. I met with the other marketing team members there. And that's when I first met Scott Blum. Scott Blum was the son of the founder of that company and a partner in that company. And I met with him for the first time. And he's like, "Hey, I can hire you to do this, but I also want to do this, 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 and this." So we hit it off right away. But he had like 5 different ideas that he wanted to focus on and start. And he's just a visionary entrepreneur. And he just needed someone to figure out how to do the things he wanted to do in his head that were more technical than he was capable of, or more detail-oriented, to be honest, than he is. And so at that moment, I had a choice to make. I could continue to be an entrepreneur on my own in this office in Irvine with my partner down in San Diego, or I could step away from it and take what was effectively a job, but also the opportunity to work with this man, Scott Blum, and start other businesses. Honestly, because of the income potential, it was above $38,000 a year. To be honest, it was $42,000. So the job, I was for $42,000, and it had health insurance. My wife was pregnant. We were just recently married, and she's still in school. So I said yes to that. And then I spent the next year figuring out everything he wanted to do and how to do it. And that's pretty much the journey. And that's a consistent theme. So as we go through different stories, all the way from the very first startup there to literally ClickFunnels just a year ago and our most recent launches with them, the theme is the same. It's really finding an opportunity, and you make a decision that's a yes or no. Sometimes they're great. They don't always work out, but along the journey, you're progressing forward.
Going back to that decision of going from entrepreneur to taking this job, was that an easy decision or a hard decision to make? Because I've also been at that crossroads in my career too. So would love to learn a little bit more about your mindset around that. What was that moment like?
Yeah. Because of the ideas that were pitched in the same process, had it just been a job, I don't know if I would have been brave enough to just take the job. But because it was a job plus 4 other business ideas, that just sparked the creativity in me, and it gave me problems to solve. And I'm obsessed with solving problems. So it gave me energy and got me excited enough that I went home, sold it to my wife. And there wasn't an easy decision. I had to break up with a business partner, and we had to figure out how to split up that company. And I literally just gave it to him. I was like, all right, you can get 100% of the company, walked away from that. So I walked away from my original startup business, and, he ran it for like 5-6 more years successfully and did well. And, I had to sell it to my wife and explain that I was literally giving up on a company that I had started and taking a job. But again, it's that spark. It's that, but there's more. And it's always that, but that's more that makes things exciting and interesting, and it kind of leans you in a specific direction.
Yeah, I found myself at a similar crossroads, and not ironically, the job offer was $42,000 for me as well, which is hilarious. But it was probably about 2014. I was running my marketing company, and I knew I wanted to get into software, but I didn't want to move to Silicon Valley, which is where all the good software opportunities are. And I had this opportunity to join Infusionsoft's social media marketing team and be social media hire number 2 behind one of my good friends, Heather Dobson, who was the first person there. And we were pioneering. This is back when Facebook ads weren't even a thing, at least not a proven thing. Everyone still thought social media was a fad, very much pioneering corporate social media marketing at this time. And for me, I felt like a complete sellout. It was a really tough decision for me to make this decision, even though there was a lot of benefits to it. And long story short, again, it wasn't just any job. It was a job that I could see, even though it was a little bit of a sidestep. I call it moving in 45-degree angles, where sometimes we're faced with these opportunities where it's not a direct step towards what we want, but we can see how it might accelerate us to get to where we want faster. And that's exactly what Infusionsoft was for me. I was there for 16 months. They started prep to go public. It got super corporate. The culture shifted, got political. I'm a young guy in my 20s. Like, I don't know how to play corporate politics. I just want to get in and build stuff and add value. And so, it kind of got a little weird. And so I just went back to being a partner and running my own agency. But it was a really good experience to be part of a really fast growing tech startup company. And one of the lessons that I learned from that specifically was don't suffer unnecessarily. Yeah. And it seems like maybe that might have been something that you could relate to through your story too. Sometimes we have these moments in entrepreneurship where we're running our own business, we're doing our own thing, but it's really, really challenging. And at least for me, I needed to be putting money into my business, not sucking all the money out of it just to pay my bills and living expenses. And so, I think that's one mistake that a lot of people make in entrepreneurship is they try to go all in prematurely, or they put themselves in a place where they have to suffer unnecessarily. So, tell us a little bit more about the early innings of navigating that opportunity and the other business ideas that your partner brought to the table, and how everything evolved from there.
Yeah, there was a gamut of different ideas. One of them was as absurd as. I shouldn't say absurd. That's not the right word. But it was strategic.
Well, depends on what it is.
I'm gonna press it. So the original, one of the ideas, he was a single entrepreneur with a very successful business, but he wanted to get married. It was his goal. So he decided he didn't want to just get married. He wanted to marry a model. So one of his business opportunities, he created a golf catalog or calendar. It was just photos of models playing golf. And it was literally the name of the catalog, or the calendar was golf women playing golf. And he hired these women, 12 of them, because you need 12, was one for every month.
Simple math.
Met them. And sure enough, to his credit, married one of them.
All right.
So that was one of the
plan worked out.
Very simple, very straightforward. Not long for it, because once he was engaged, she wasn't going to want him to do it again.
Right.
But that was one idea. So that one's simple. But the rest of them were more complex, actually, businesses. And Buy.com specifically wasn't the one with the most potential. It wasn't the one with the most potential. We had a clothing line we were starting because we were friends. He was friends and I had a relationship with Massimo at the time. And we saw what he was doing with his brand before he'd sold it to, I think he sold it to Target, right? So we knew that industry, we knew people in the industry, and we owned the domain where.com. And so it had huge potential. And we were early, everything was internet focused. So we were like really early. We knew that the internet was the answer. And Buy.com was much simpler. It was an idea to help his dad sell more of their product online. And then again, I'll try and tell the story as short as I can, but it was circumstance after circumstance after circumstance that created this massive movement. And it was just little decisions along the way. The first one was Ingram Micro, which was our fulfillment center, where Amazon was shipping everything and building warehouses. Turns out probably the right idea. Jeff Bezos, pretty smart guy. We did the opposite. We drop shipped everything, complete drop ship business. And one of the companies was called Ingram Micro, and they drop shipped all our technology products. So all our tech products. Originally, we thought we were just going to launch a small store, and they sent us a catalog with all their products. Now, it's just data. So the difference of launching everything or launching a small window of products is there's no difference. At least we thought. So we just decided to sell everything. So that was our first thing. We had buycomp.com, and we just sold everything Ingram had on the list because it was easier than just trying to filter it out. We just categorized it and listed it. That was the first thing.
And so these types of products you're selling are computer parts?
All computer parts. Like back in the day, you're thinking Palm Pilots, right? Laptops, monitors,
keyboards,
printers, keyboards, anything and everything they sold. All tech-based. Yeah. That was the first step. So all of a sudden...
And this is riding the wave of...
It was before the wave.
Oh, this is before the wave. So this is pre.com,
it was .com, but it was very early.
Yeah.
So it was right when shopping sites started launching. So that's the next thing that happened.
Okay.
CNET, which was just kind of building its brand personally, launched shopper.com. And there are all these different price engine sites that went up. And we figured out that model pretty quick. And we did a deal with one of them where they sent us a catalog of the lowest price of every product they had. It was just a simple CSV file. And it just gave us every SKU and the lowest price that day. So we saw that. We're like, we can just be cheaper. And so what we did is we took that simple file they sent us every single day, and we just changed the price by a penny and re-uploaded the file and said, this is our pricing. So all of a sudden, we are now the lowest price on earth, and we have proof to do it. Again, this is a 5-minute decision. So these are things, all that are happening within days, maybe weeks, we're making these decisions because it's just me and my partner and the tech guy, the three of us running this company and his assistant, 4 people. Well, that's the third decision that happens. All of a sudden we go live with the site, shopper.com goes live. We are the lowest price. Turns out when you sell things online, people don't actually need support. We hadn't thought about that part. So all of a sudden we're rapid hiring. We're hiring people as fast as we can. We're growing as fast as we can. And in the first year, we broke the record from Compaq. I think Compaq Computer was the fastest growing company in the world. And we broke it. We did $123 million in sales in the first year.
Wow.
Non-profit, clearly, but in sales. Because we were the lowest price, we didn't make a lot of money. But so that was just, you think about going from 0 sales in January when we launched and doing $123 million in sales transactions within a 12-month period. Everything you can imagine happened to that process. Rapid growth, rapid attention, craziness, all the things. But the consistent theme was really quick decisions that completely made or break everything as we did along the way. And that just happened over and over in my life.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest things I see people struggle with is thinking they have to have the perfect idea before they take action. And so that's one of the things that just came from you telling that story, is just, taking action and, seeing opportunity, or taking action and seeing how you can be a little bit more competitive. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that from this experience, and maybe others too, of the importance of not having all the answers at the beginning, but having that passion that you spoke about at the very beginning, and just taking inspired action and learning along the way and making iterative improvements. And how do you know what to listen to and what not to listen to?
Yeah. And I think it comes down to at least have a reasonable strategy. A plan is different. A plan is actually like a roadmap, a business plan. Like, this is actually what we're going to do. You don't need a plan, but you should have a strategy in your head. You have an idea that you're committed and excited about, and a strategy, which is something you can write down on a napkin, is the best way I've heard it described, right? Like, this is a strategy. I think this could work. I'm willing enough that I'm willing to invest my time, some potential money, other people's time and money into it. Those are the two things. And then to your point, everything else after that is just decisions fast. The longer you take to make decisions, the less likely they're going to be successful. I don't know the stats, but all the research I've seen is basically your effectiveness of decision-making is much higher if you go with rapid decisions. And then as you try and analyze it more, your likeliness to be correct goes down substantially.
Mm-hmm. I think I've seen Bezos talk about this, how throughout their organization, it's 60% certainty that that's the best option, and like making those decisions quickly. And from your story specifically, making fast decisions like that back in the early mid 90s through the 2000s, that was kind of, at least from my perspective, that was a interesting mindset to have at the time, where that mindset, making those, rapid decisions in the course of days or weeks, it's even more important now with how fast technology is moving now. And so, that was something that honestly my awareness has been expanded to around, because I usually like to get to the 80% mark before I make a final decision. But stats and studies show that 60% certainty, making decisions, taking the action, getting the data, making new decisions, that's really the path to really ensure that one, you are getting the results that you want, but two, it's like you said, with more certainty does not come better decisions.
Right. Yeah. And you can see how for larger companies that becomes harder and harder, right? I think as I work with different size companies, 250, 300 employee companies to 2 and 3 person employees, you see that decisions struggle unless you truly know who's responsible. So that's the kind of the last piece, is making sure the leadership team knows who's responsible for making decisions. That way, that one person's empowered to make them quickly. It's easy when it's 2 of you, although sometimes just as difficult, I guess. But theoretically, you should be able to make a decision pretty quickly. If you and I are starting a business, we have to make a decision on it. We can have a quick conversation about it. But if there's 300 people involved, and a marketing director now is working with a VP of marketing who now reports to a CMO who now reports to the CEO, you can realize how that all of a sudden bogs things down. No different than what you experienced probably over at Infusionsoft, is all of a sudden there's lots of people involved in the decisions. So decisions aren't getting made quickly.
Right. So you started with Buy.com at 4 people. How big did Buy.com get from an employee standpoint? And I also know you have experience leading large teams at Kajabi, at ClickFunnels. Yeah. What are some lessons you learned around rapid growth, leading big teams, communication? How critical are those in the early stages too?
Yeah, I think mostly through mistakes. I learned a lot of it. I was not a leader at 28 or 26 as we were growing. Definitely not. I was a really poor leader, actually, I would say, when I was in my even up to my early 30s, I would not consider myself a good leader. I was always a good partner. I think loyalty to my partners and their goals and commitments has always been my number one strength. And that's really what I encourage people to do that don't want to be forward facing, that aren't the visionary, is be committed to them and their goals, and be truly committed to finding success for them and understanding what that means to them, right? Whether that's in their business or even in their life, right? And just being able to do that. But in terms of leadership, I learned it was a very slow process for me to learn leadership, to be honest, to the point where I almost would like to go back and apologize to all the people I managed my early 30s and late 20s, because I think you have less patience at that point. So everything was very clear to me, and I didn't have the empathy to understand that other people didn't see things the same way I did, or didn't know everything I knew, and I didn't know how to explain it in a good way. Again, I didn't go to business school. I didn't have systems and processes. I did have the fortune of working with some really, really smart people who did go to business school and did have systems and processes. And I slowly pulled those out of them. And I take one thing from someone like, oh, I really like that. And then I take another thing from someone over time, but that took a long time. So what I've learned along the way that, someone doesn't have to go through 20 years to learn. The first thing is empathy. It really is. You can't be a complete jerk. It seems obvious, but sometimes when you're in the middle of it and you're frustrated with a team member or the entire team, or literally sometimes the entire company, like, what are we doing? You have to start with empathy. And just even in recent conversations I've had with some entrepreneurs, they don't have that part because their vision is so clear and they're so passionate about it. They don't understand why the team members aren't running at the same pace they are or working at the same level they are. To give you perspective, Buy.com, now looking back, seems like a fun story, but I was working 20 hours a day. And, again, I said I had a new baby at home that I wasn't spending any time with. I was committed to this process. We put 2 years straight of probably 4 to 6 hours of sleep, work everything else, and just rinse and repeat. Saturdays, we worked half day Saturday, so 8 hours on Saturday. And then because I wasn't the best father at the same time either, we'd golf on Sundays for some reason, which is absurd if you think about it. If you're with your business partners and you're working 20 hours a day, in hindsight, you're working 20 hours a day or 18 maybe, you're sleeping on the couch at the office half the time, sometimes driving to the house and sleeping and getting up and leaving. I literally drive home like 2 a.m. I do the feeding for the baby at 2, get up at about 6 or 7 and go back to the office. But then you do that for 6 days straight and you decide what you're going to do on Sunday is golf with them. Not the best decision, but that was not your question. But just a side note, don't do that, people. But what I learned about management is, first of all, empathy. And then second of all is clarity, is, really being clear. I talked about responsibility. Make sure everyone knows who's responsible and who's empowered to make decisions. And then the third thing is clarity on the goal. If people don't understand it, you have to give them a safe space to ask, and then you have to give clear direction. That's really the main pieces. As I've evolved, for lack of a better term, I'm really proud of some of the teams I've worked with over the last 5 years, even 10. Even I would say over the last 5 years, my leadership has got to a level where I'm finally proud of it. And that comes from mostly allowing people to do what they're good at and then helping to make sure they have all the tools they need to be successful. I think of it much more as like a GM of a sports team, because you don't tell a quarterback how to be a quarterback. You make sure the quarterback has all the tools he needs around him, the receivers, the linemen, even the defense, so he doesn't have to score 40 points plus to win the game, as a team to win. And that's what leadership really is. It's not about the victory for yourself. It's running the team and making sure they know how to succeed and they have all the tools they need.
I love that. Yeah. I love that you brought up a little bit of the what not to do in business with your relationship. But that's one of the things I admire about what you've created over the years is the relationship that you have with your wife, Molly. You two have started companies together as well. Just to tie the bow on the Buy.com story. So you started with 4 people. What did you scale that to in what period of time? And I know that it's some level, a defining moment in your life was that experience created financial abundance for you, and seeing more money than you ever thought possible in your bank account. What was that like, both on the excitement side, but then also, I'm sure that there was also something about that experience that wasn't quite what you expected too. So tell us a little bit about possibly the dark side of the financial success.
Yeah. So as I said, we set a record. So fastest growing company in a year at the time. which has now been broken, but that brings a lot of attention. So venture capitalists started coming in, we started having conversations. SoftBank came in and made a major investment in our company. The moment that happened, everything changes. You talked about, kind of being in a corporate world and that experience for you, same thing happens. And I've seen this consistently, but I didn't know then. I'm 28. We've been working on this company for 2.5, almost 3 years when we finally do the deal with SoftBank. And we're about 185 employees at this point. We've launched additional brands. We're full buy.com. We bought the domain, did that deal. We're doing Super Bowl commercials. Like we're doing things and having fun. And the money comes in, but with the money comes management. So all of a sudden, especially companies like that, what you don't realize about venture capital and private equity, they really have one goal most of the time. It's to get their money back. So every decision they make is now about getting their money back at 4x or 5x or 10x the return. They're not about owning companies. Very few venture capital or private equity companies are about actually operating businesses. They're about flipping businesses. So now all the decisions come around that. So we're 180 employees. The transaction happens. I was not in a lockout period. They didn't lock me in, which I've had happen since. So oddly enough, I got under the radar. And so here I am. I'll never forget the day, actually. The transaction happens. I'm fully vested. And it was for equity, the buy. So the money wasn't even to be used. Some of the money went to us. And I dialed my bank account on the phone because I don't even know. I guess you could have done it on the internet, but I don't even know if I knew how to go on. Ironically, I was running a .com company. I don't think you could check your bank accounts back then. So I dialed, you dial in on your phone to get the balance. And I held it up on speaker with my wife, and it was $1.18 million in my checking account.
Dang.
No strategy, no plan, no, like all the things you know now about how to plan for wealth. None of that in place. No, I did have a financial advisor, but he wasn't like that kind of a financial advisor. So, of course, lots of things change when you make $1 million. One, you learn how to pay taxes. That's one thing that happens pretty quick.
Painful
nice
lesson.
Letter.
Yeah.
Two, you figure out, your life just starts shifting. Your mindset shifts. So you go from a person who thought $38,000 was the goal to now all your goals change. And I think the thing I didn't expect, the biggest thing I didn't expect is how little I cared about the business once that happened. And it's because we were no longer in charge. There was no exciting project or like the goal. The next goal was their goal, not ours. And we had some skin in the game after, so there's potential. And at one point, I was worth $33 million on paper, which would have been another life-changing event. But that was right before the .com crash. So the only actual cash I got out of the company was the early investment. I never even got the IPO cash. But that's all them. It's not you.
Right.
So I lasted about a little under a year after that. And I found another company that had an exciting idea. And I went and worked with them for a little bit. And we launched a e-com platform at the time, which was unheard of. So silly things like running Florsham shoes, e-com business. That was our business. So went and did that and just learned how to find entrepreneurs who had an idea, or even better. And here's my biggest tip, actually. Allowed to give my biggest tip?
Let's do it.
So if you're not a front-facing entrepreneur, but you're really good at figuring things out, find yourself an entrepreneur who has a business, not an idea. So in my arc of doing this, I've worked with entrepreneurs with ideas, and that's really hard sometimes because it's not proven. And then I've worked, the biggest success, other than buy.com, is working with entrepreneurs and business owners that have a business that isn't scaling. So maybe they're a 3-person company, 5-person company. They have huge potential, but they don't have the execution to run a big company or even get past their current ceiling, right? That's when I've had my massive success, is being the person to help someone take it at a zero to their business. And so if you can find someone, even in your local circle, that has a 6-figure business and work with them to make it a 7-figure business or a 7-figure business, and then work with them to make it an 8-figure business because of the asset you bring to the company that they just don't have as a skill set. That's much more powerful and actually a lot easier than trying to start the next big thing. Truly.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
And the book that comes to mind is, Peter Thiel's 0 to 1. It's so hard to go from nothing to something.
Yeah.
It's kind of become pop culture of, finding businesses to acquire with baby boomers retiring and things of this nature. I think that strategy gets, I think it's almost become, on one hand, it's underrated. And on the other hand, it's become almost too cliche, but it is something that there is massive opportunity there. You don't have to be the person to come up with the idea. And oftentimes I can even speak from my own experience too. In some ways, the founder, you're too close to the idea. You especially if you founded a company or created a product, after a few years, you almost know it too well to where you can't speak to it with enough simplicity that the market can actually resonate with what it is. I know this is one of our challenges with Spiffy specifically, is, we're really, really close to the product. We want to explain all of the bells and whistles and why it's different, but there's a much more simple story to tell. And when you come in from an outsider's perspective, especially when you like solving problems, like you mentioned, you have that fresh perspective that can really be the thing that accelerates things quite quickly. So, yeah. You've done that multiple times over and over, specifically with software companies. So, let's talk a little bit about how, so you started the e-com platform. And then I know that between then and Kajabi and ClickFunnels, you also worked with a lot of big name influencers, thought leaders, personal brands, doing big product launches, had some success early on with Chalene Johnson, early on in her career in the fitness space. Yep. She's an icon and a household name in the fitness space. Tell us a little about that journey and going from e-commerce platforms, buy.com, to the info marketing space for authors, speakers, coaches, consultants. Obviously, the common thread is online commerce, but it's a completely different industry. How did you get involved in that? And tell us about some of the early successes there.
Yeah. So coming out of my most recent exit, we just had a company called automotive.com that we sold to Motor Trend magazine, or the parent company.
Oh, nice.
Peterson Publishing. So we went through that. And this time I was in a retention plan, for lack of a better term, right? So basically, typically when you sell a company, they don't tell you you're not actually done working for the company.
Yeah,
especially like lead executives and leadership employees. So I was in a 3-year program with them that I had to stay. Mm-hmm. It was a contract where it was valuable to stay that had just ended. So just finished my last exit and then delivering on the transition plan with them. I didn't really have anything else to do, to be honest. I had a couple ideas of my own, which I don't know that my ideas are always the best ideas, and was starting an agency and helping companies do product launches. So I had just recently met Jeff Walker and Brendan Burchard. And originally from, I don't even know how I found them both, but had met, I saw Brendan's stuff. Someone shared it with me. And then he had a local event. And so I went to the event, and instead of sitting in the front, I just walked backstage and said hello, which I didn't know you weren't supposed to do, by the way. So then I met him and we became friends and eventually business partners, as you know. Yep. And so I got in that world really quick because the concepts were so exciting, honestly. The concept of just Brendan's early concepts of, being an expert and starting that business experts industry itself was brand new at the time. And then Jeff Walker's theories and concepts of how to launch that, doing PLF launches, also it all made sense in my head. That's the best way I could describe it. As they're describing it, not only did I understood it, I knew how to do it. So I started a small agency doing that, and my best friend signed on to be my salesperson. The great thing about that, he was an amazing salesperson. The problem with that, he was an amazing salesperson. He's still my best friend today. He's the absolute best salesperson I've ever met in my life. He crushed us to the point we couldn't keep up with demand. So I burned out pretty quickly on that business. But one of the clients that we had signed, and I actually signed them, he didn't get that deal, just for the record, was Chalene Johnson. And I knew them as local. They lived in the same area as us. We were both into fitness. My wife knew them, was actually in one of Chalene's programs with them. So we had a relationship. And they just called and said, hey, can you help us with this? And this is the lesson. They had talked to a large agency who had offered to start Chalene's online business for a 50-50 rev share, right? And like I said, I'd learned enough about this where I knew this was figure outable, as Marie Folio would say, right? And so I said, hey, I'll just be on the call and I could advise you. I sat on the call and I listened to this agency give this pitch about splitting Chalene's business 50-50 for them to basically be an agency. It was a great pitch, by the way. And I just said, I think that's a great idea. I don't think you need a 50-50 partner, especially this agency, to do it. Why don't I do it with you and I'll take half, instead of 50, I'll take 25. And they bought it. They said yes. So I looked at the business and started that with them and got to the point where 80% of my revenue was coming from working with them and 20% of my revenue was coming from the other 9 clients I was trying to support. I shut down the agency and became actual true business partners with them. And Chalene, Brett, and I built that business from that first day, that first idea, her 30-day challenge that her and I did again, goes back to just when you're starting something, it's not pretty. It's 2 a.m. videos that I'm finally getting from her that I'm then writing the code for the page to post and upload. So for a 6 a.m. email to go out, it was that dirty for a while. It was a tough 30 days, but it catapulted her business, completely catapulted her business. And we just continued to grow on that for 8 years until I had an opportunity to work at Kajabi. And that was a really cool opportunity to get back into tech for me. And I loved Kenny. I'm a fan of Kenny and I loved his business. I was a customer of the product of Kajabi for, probably 7 years at that point, 8 years. I was at their 1-year birthday party when they first started. So I knew them well and was excited to join. And the temptation of running a team at that scale is what tempted me from that. So Chalene and Brett, honestly, were the first partner where I didn't have like an actual exit or just like an end to the journey. I just got excited about the opportunity to run a team again. And that's where we ended that one. But again, cool. The consistent theme is just saying, I can do that. So, if someone's looking for what to do next, like I told you, I have a 24-year-old son. He is, and if you're that age right now, it's hard. I didn't realize how hard it is, but right now it's hard. I have a 29-year-old daughter and a 24-year-old son, and a lot of them and their friends are trying to figure out not just what they're going to be or how they're going to work, they're just trying to find jobs. So if you're in that world, the answer to that right now is opportunity, and just say yes and figure stuff out. You don't have to know, but you don't have to lie that you know it either. Just, I can figure that out.
Totally. Yeah. There's so much truth, wisdom, and insight in just getting started and just getting paid to learn. That's one of my big things I teach constantly in a lot of our workshops too, is you always have to find ways to get paid to learn. Otherwise, the journey is really, really long and you just never cross that chasm of accepting money and getting started.
Yeah, that makes
even
a lot
to
of
this
sense.
day, we're always getting paid to learn. Every single person, every single business is getting paid to learn. So how do you create that MVP, get out to the marketplace, get money coming in the door, build the confidence, and in some way, shape, or form, kind of put your back against the wall to be forced to figure it out. And so especially if you're a problem solver, especially if you if you have that level of confidence, isn't the certainty that you know how to do everything. It's a certainty that you can figure it out.
Absolutely.
And if you have that level of confidence in yourself that, everything's figure outable, you can get really, really far, and you're a testament to that. So I know that just to kind of ground the conversation in the 6-fig concept for a split second, you went from, college dropout to partnering in this business that, with his business partner, lots of different business ideas. Buy.com came of that. Within the first year of Buy.com, you had your first 6-figure year. You raised, millions of dollars at Buy.com. You became a cash millionaire at age 28. You went on to serve, other industries with the e-commerce platforms, with working with different companies, building out their online e-commerce platforms, to then transitioning into this online launch world where you've had some success too. Tell us about some of your early successes where, and the thought process or the strategy behind generating 6 figures in a week or even in a day or even in an hour, and a couple of those examples and what really goes into that. We hear these stories of the fabled 7-figure launches, and let's break that down for people. Let's give people like a little bit of inside curtain into how those numbers play out. Again, we don't need to talk about any specific company's numbers, but just in general, I think it's important to kind of demystify some of those things and ground them in reality a little bit. Yeah,
for sure. I think the first thing, which is kind of like pre that question, but I promise I'll get back to it, is, as I look at it, one of the things for someone that's wanting to get as specifically as like a number 2, an integrator or an operator, whatever the term, I think integrators. Anyway, I won't go on a tangent. I argue that term quite a bit. I think rocket fuel has done a little damage to our industry, but I won't go down that tangent. But the one thing every single time is I took a step back and bet on myself. So it wasn't, I think as employees, when you become an employee, a lot of times you're worried about, and even in early days, like the fastest way to get a raise as an employee is to probably change jobs. Right. Yeah. The current job you're at is going to give you a 5% to 10% raise. The next company, because of the experience you have that current job, is going to give you a 25 to 30% raise and probably a title change. And that's great if you're on that path. But the entrepreneur partner path is different than that, as you know. Yep. And every single time, risk reward, every time I've bet on myself, and instead of, again, early days, it was, instead of the company I have, I'm going to go start these 4 businesses with Scott Blum. Or at automobile.com, it was, I'm going to take, honestly, probably $100,000 less than I was being paid at the previous company because I see the upside of this company. So equity in exchange, upside in exchange for current paychecks has always paid off for me. Almost every time. I would say absolutely 80-20 rule. And there are some exceptions, but we just won't talk about those exceptions. But I'll say that's first thing. That's the first thing. Is like bet on yourself. And you said it, right? Yeah. But as you go through that, the lessons I've learned by willing to just take the chance, and I talked about even Shalene's launch. I think her very first launch was under 6 figures. Under 6 figures. Massive catapult. We built her list, but the actual revenue was under 6 figures. Which, and for a pretty large audience, I think we reached 37,000 people did that challenge in the first 30 days, but the offer wasn't big. I didn't understand, neither her nor I really understood the true nuances of making an offer. So it wasn't properly structured, but we did it. And it was not a failure. So that's the first thing. But then you get better at it. You get reps. And just like anything, just like push-ups, just like anything else you do in life, cold plunges, the more reps you get, the easier something gets. But you also learn what not to do. And I had a great benefit. I had mentors that were willing to call me out. And I'll never forget my first 7-figure launch. Shalene and I did it together. And a true launch. Like you think about like a open close cart launch, not an exit or business opportunity. And we were doing it with affiliate partners, and Brendan was kind enough to be an affiliate. Brendan Burchard was kind enough to be an affiliate partner for us because we built a relationship. Shalene had spoken on his stage at this point, and he truly mentored me through that process in a brutally honest way that I will never I could probably never repay him. I would get text messages from him at like 1 a.m. saying, hey, bro, you can't do that. Like I'd say something in an email. He's like, man, you can't say that. Learn what not to do. But also, hey, did you do this? Did you put this on the page? Did you change these words 8 hours before close? Like he mentored me, one, because he had skin in the game. So respect, right? But also just out of pure love for the game. And I had a chance to do that lots of times over. Brendan was the very first one that really mentored me through that process. And we had a massive success. We had our first 7-figure launch, which especially at the time was like a massive milestone. There weren't a lot of people doing that.
Yeah.
And we did that from launching our business, the 30-day challenge. By the end of that year, we'd done a 7-figure launch. And we kind of built from there. And then, so that was my first big launch. I didn't do anything different, but I did everything little right.
Right.
Mostly because Brendan told me every time I did it wrong, he'd text me and tell me why. But you learn, right?
Totally.
And those are real nuances that you just don't know until you try. And then we just continue to do it. Like every quarter, we do a launch and just improve and improve. And then we had our first $3 million launch because we changed topics. We went to marketing instead of personal development. So we jumped topics, and all of a sudden it turns out the same tactics work in a different area, but the money's better, right? So $2,000 product, you did $3 million launch.
Yeah. You can charge more, conversion rates are higher, everything's better. Yeah,
which is amazing. And a brand new product with an audience that didn't know that world yet. So we were able to introduce a brand new concept to them. And so then I had it all figured out. And inevitably, that's when you realize you don't have anything figured out. So I talked about this a little bit and a couple of times on stage. I now thought I did 7-figure launches. Like that was the definition of what Kevin did. And that's when the moment you think that is when everything doesn't work. So then I remember, I'll never forget the day. So we've done 1 million, we've done 3 million, we've done consistent 1 million. So we've probably done a couple $1 million launches. We've just done a $3 million launch. It's a year later, we're launching the same product. Expectations are $3 to $5 million. And we opened the cart. We tweaked a couple things, primarily all new videos. We opened the cart. On day one, you're looking to get, for you that don't know, I'm going to break the rules and go to the camera. When you're doing a launch, you're expecting, and you know this, right? Let's say it's a 10-day launch. A third of your revenue comes on day one. And a third of your revenue, if you do it right, comes on the last day or the last 48 hours because you have urgency in your closing cart. All the rest of the money comes in the middle because you're just consistently mailing people. That first time when we did 3 million, it was that. We did $1 million in one day, which is massive. So the first time I've ever done $1 million in the first day is the third rule. We did $1 million in the first day. I was like, yes. A year later, same launch, we did, I think, $24,000 in sales. Crickets. And you just have to reassess everything. So we completely rebuilt the entire closed cart process. We did 4 new videos. We restructured everything. We saved it to a point, but it just wasn't the same. And then you had to go reverse engineer. But more importantly, you get humbled, right? You realize you don't know what you don't know. And so I just went back and remastered it to the point, I think the end of it is finally doing an 8-figure launch, which is probably one of the most exciting moments. Doing $1 million in about 10 minutes is working with ClickFunnels when we launched 2.0 and did this massive dramatic demonstration. Obviously, huge marketing, just wizardry working with Russell and the team. But to be sitting there and part of that process and just managing the team and the launch itself, to be hitting refresh and see those type of numbers coming in and be surrounded with the people we know in the space who just spoke on stage and see $1 million come in within 10 minutes, just blew my mind of what's possible. So I've had the ups, I've had the downs, but all along the way, the lesson is that really it's about learning the nuances. So the very first launch, I didn't know what I was doing, but I did it. That $200 website, you didn't know what you were doing, you did it. Now, I can do $10 million launches. Now you have an entire company who does one piece, amazing checkouts, and it's changed the world on how people do checkouts just because you figured out that website.
Yep.
You know?
Yeah, totally. Our stories have an interesting crossover around Brendan, and we basically Brendan had an opportunity to create a course for Oprah and did all the work to create the course, but then was had a conflict of time, energy, and effort in a deadline for his book. And so Brendan tossed me and my business partner, Jeremy, the keys to the Ferrari to do his Oprah campaign with very little guidance. So we stepped in there and ended up crushing that promotion for him. After that experience, and then staying on with Brendan for a couple of years, through Brendan got to work with a lot of big names in the industry as well, both prior to Brendan and since. And this concept of a 7-figure launch, I don't know if our industry likes to create the mystique around it or whatnot, but let's kind of unpack like what that 7-figure launch really takes. Because yes, like we're generating $1 million within a week. Over my career, I've done $7 million launches across 4 different clients, and you can generate a lot of excitement and big numbers, and it's really good to generate a lot of hype and awareness. Most of the time when those numbers are done, aside from a big name like a Brendan, it's done through an affiliate launch. And let's just kind of demystify that entire concept. Like, how many months of planning goes into these things?
Most people are trying to attract high-ticket clients with a low-ticket brand. At personalbrand.com, we create brands that command attention and higher fees. See how at personalbrand.com. Okay, back to the show.
Again, not talking about any one specific launch, but just kind of breaking down some of the numbers and how it all falls would be fun to riff on back and forth a little bit too.
Absolutely. So the one advantage I probably have is having done so many of them, right?
Right.
So I would say even an internal team, if you haven't done one before, you probably need 6 months to plan. And even maybe before that, if you're doing an affiliate launch, wouldn't you say?
Totally.
That's the number one thing. So the number one thing, if you're doing an affiliate launch, if you're not going to do paid media, is you got to get the support from your partners. And back in the day, not to age myself, that's the only option there was. So you talk about these early launches with Shalene, and some of the ones we did with Kenny at Kajabi, and even with Brendan, there were only partners. Paid media wasn't an option. Like, paid media came later in the game. These launches early, we were just supporting each other with what we were doing. Right. We had advertising, but you didn't have Facebook, you didn't have Meta, you didn't have TikTok, you didn't have the things you have now as an asset. So that was the number one, is get the commitment from your partners on a calendar date that they weren't promoting something else. So that blocked out a lot of time. But realistically, with a good team, you can pretty much do a launch in 3 months, I would say, kind of from start to finish. Would you agree that's about reasonable?
Yeah. I think especially if you know your market, the offer's already converting, you can pull them together quite quickly. We tended to have to pull together quite a few launches in record time as you have done as well. I think at least from the ones that have gone the smoothest also, and we've seen this across a lot of our spiffy customers too, people that do like a mini launch or a pre-launch, 90 days before their big launch, either the same offer, a similar offer, but getting that feedback and that data early on. I think the biggest mistake people make is learning this concept of launching, learning the concept or the strategy of affiliates. I mean, ironically, affiliate marketing went from this, underground, concept to now everyone knows what affiliate marketing is with all their TikTok links and things on social media these days. So affiliate marketing is much more common than it used to be. But just this concept of affiliate marketing launch and doing a launch in general, the biggest mistake people make is not testing the offer first, not going to affiliates with an offer that's not proven and for most of the type of affiliate partners that you want to engage with, they're going to want to see data on those conversions before they send their traffic to that list. And so while this concept of launching and affiliates is a great marketing strategy, there is a sequencing of how these big promotions are put together. And usually the first time that the product is promoted, it's not generating these big numbers, like you mentioned too, like the first time with Shalene. That first launch, again, brought in tens of thousands of dollars, which is nothing to sniff at. Like, that's amazing. There's a lot of revenue coming in a short period of time, and it set the stage for the massive success later. And so just really wanting to kind of speak to how there's a sequencing of events and this scale of stair stepping into that as well.
Well, at Spiffy, you guys have seen that, and even at Kajabi, we saw the same thing, right? ClickFunnels as well, is like, you see the people change their lives way before 7-figure launches.
Yep.
Way before. And it is that proof that they have an offer. 0 to 1, like you said, that concept is real. If you can sell one, that's the hardest sale. And so nowadays, back then it was different. Affiliate marketing was like, yeah, bro, I got you. You're on the calendar. Now the complexity of it, you have to launch it first. You have to know, you can so easily too. You have to know your earnings per click. That's the only thing they're going to want to know. It's like, okay, if I send you traffic, what's my earning per click? And you have to be obsessed with that and know that. This is a different game nowadays than it was back then. But also there's so much opportunity. It's so easy to test. And test rapidly. And I think that's the biggest mistake people that want to launch something do, is they're afraid to find out. Fear of failure is real, but it's keeping you from success, if that makes sense. And the worst version of that, honestly, is a slow failure. And I don't want to set people's budgets for ads, but whatever your budget is, spend it all in 3 to 5 days and close cart on that 5th day. Don't spread that budget over 6 months to figure something out, because you're never going to figure something out. The data will be too fragmented. The learning process, all this, right? It's like, whatever your budget is, if your budget's $100, spend $100 in 3 days and find out if you make $1, or spend $1,000. Like, whatever your budget is, learn fast, fail fast, and then adjust accordingly. Don't spend a year trying to chase down an offer that doesn't work.
What are your thoughts? I mean, obviously both of us have been in this industry and been on the come up, since the early days. I had to learn how to custom code HTML pages before ClickFunnels was a thing. And now anyone and everyone can go and stand up a website. And especially now with ChatGPT, you can write the copy. And now with video editing tools and even AI video editing tools, a lot of the friction or a lot of the barrier to entry has, really been democratized, we can just say. What's your take on where the industry's at, where it's going? Do you think that the industry is still in its infancy, or has it hit maturity? Maybe somebody listening now, they might think like, oh, well, there's already this guru on that, and there's this podcast on this topic, and everyone that's already kind of doing it. Just give us your quick take from your insight and your perspective of what you've seen at your time at Kajabi, at ClickFunnels, and just like your initial gut feeling around where the industry's headed with AI and all of the perspective and insight that you have.
Yeah. And I don't think my perspective is alone. A lot of the people I talk to who've been through, like you and I, this for a while, see the potential of, not even the potential, the reality at this point of AI. Literally just this week, I launched 4 major projects, just vibe coding them. I got a note saying, hey, I think we want to work on this. And rather than go through a team, an agency, anything, I'm like, let's just test this. It's real. You can, using vibe coding. I'm obsessed with Firefly right now because I think the prompts are better and the output's better for images, but using image generation, vibe coding, and, just basic chat GPT and just going back and forth, and all the other tools that are available, we go on and on and on. And video production, AI video, all those stuff. You can do pretty much anything in a short period of time at a level enough to prove your concept. Right. But where I think it's going, and I think a lot of people agree, information isn't enough. You have to build a movement. And the concept is no longer, I'm going to teach you something. It's that we're going to do this, and this is our purpose, and we're going to do it together. If you don't build a community, if you're not connecting people, you're probably going to struggle, because information itself is becoming a commodity. So, but information plus community, or information plus a movement, like-minded people in the same room that are supporting each other, that is the biggest opportunity right now. And there's tons of opportunity. You can niche down so small and easily make six figures helping someone solve real specific problems, especially as we're learning so much. It's just mind-blowing what's happening in our world, in health and wellness, in science, in technology, we're just learning so much. Even just opinion, it's just, you can probably talk about anything and build a community that agrees with it and make six figures just by being committed. But you have to be committed to it.
Yeah. Committed, consistent, discipline,
right?
Not jumping from thing to thing. I think in a lot of ways, it's the best and the worst time to get started. And saying that, I almost wish that I was starting all over, my entrepreneurial career right now with the same level of hunger and tenacity and, lack of responsibility that I had when I was, 20 years old when I started my marketing company. Just because, yes, there is a lot of noise in the marketplace, but it's never been easier to go from idea to MVP and have the real world data to create feedback loops in real time, to run ads, to spend $100 to test the idea. See, does anyone want to buy this thing from me?
Yeah.
And in a very short period of time, validate an idea. I think that's the hardest thing to do, is go from having a vision, wanting to create something, to validating whether it's worthy to spend your time, energy, and effort pursuing it. And yes, although the marketplace is very noisy now and will only get noisier, that's where the opportunity lies to rapidly test different ideas and then really find the one that you really want to go all in on.
Yeah, I think the greats all along have always told us in the information product, community, you just have to be one step ahead. And that's never been more true than now. And the steps can be micro. So if you figure something out specific, the potential of doing something on social media with that one specific thing you figure out, people underestimate the knowledge they have, and they assume because of the circles they're in, other people have that. And especially people that watch podcasts or watch YouTube videos or consuming content and learning. If you're a learner, you assume other people are, and they aren't. So if you're someone who can figure something out, there's so much to figure out right now that other people aren't taking the time to figure out. So be that learner and translator. Huge opportunity there. Just connect dots. Like you see some of the channels that are coming up, that are literally just doing that. They're just doing the research for you. If you're good at that, figure that out. If you're good at, whatever it is, it's so easy, but don't underestimate the one step ahead you are.
Totally. One big learning lesson, and one of our early strategies with Spiffy that I think is even more relevant today with the opportunity of vibe coding and AI, is how can you solve a problem for an existing marketplace? And that's really what we did with Spiffy. We didn't want to raise money. We wanted to control our own destiny. And we decided that the pathway to build our own platform was to solve a problem for Infusionsoft's e-commerce platform.
Right.
I had a little bit of insider knowledge, having spent time inside the four walls, and ultimately saw the opportunity there. And so I think that there's also a misconception that you have to build the next Facebook, or you have to, build this next unicorn company, where a lot of times, and in retrospect, the amount of time, energy, and effort that we've spent and money we've spent building our own platform, again, taking all of the ego out of it, if your goal is to create freedom, if your goal is to create a nice, lucrative, cash flowing business, there's a lot of opportunity to create apps for Shopify, to create apps for other e-commerce platforms, HubSpot, ActiveCampaign, others and others and others. Those are just the platforms I'm familiar with, where you're not going to be on the cover of Forbes magazine. You're most likely not going to exit for millions of dollars, but you can really afford yourself a really nice lifestyle that has a lot of flexibility and freedom, just by solving problems for existing ecosystems where there's another company that's kind of creating the movement and you're kind of drafting behind them. So I just kind of wanted to speak to that a little bit, just because I do think to provide a very tangible way where you can explore where you can take your problem solving abilities, is that you really don't need to solve a problem like cleaning up all the trash of the ocean or something that's like such a huge, daunting task. That would be great if you could solve that. And if you can, and go for it. But I just think people are over indexing for this earth shattering idea when a lot of times, even if you want to do something like that, the first step is creating freedom, so you have the ability to spend all of your time, energy, and effort solving a problem like that.
And make that first step, right? So
right.
I learned something interesting at an investor conference I was at last year, and I wish I could give the person credit, because I always hate when I quote something I can't give the person credit.
Yeah.
But it was one of the investment companies, and they were giving a lecture, and they said so many times people talk about total approachable market, right? Attainable market, approachable market, the TAM.
Yeah, addressable market.
Addressable market. I knew it was one of those A words.
Yeah.
Total addressable market. And in theory, that's the total people you could sell to, but it isn't, because you have to take into account that what percentage of those people don't want to change platforms? What percentage of those people don't want to learn something new? And instead, they talked about the total sellable market, and really narrowing it down, like you said, is like, okay, I want to be in this space, but what's the sellable solution? What's my total sellable market for this one thing, right? And I think you and I think in the word of tech, but it doesn't have to be tech. You look at the movements and the people that have had massive impacts and the way they've started, it's one thing first. Recent on my mind, only because recent and where we currently live, Charlie Kirk, as an example, regardless of what you think about his politics or his policies, he started by just showing up. I mean, if you've heard his original start, he just showed up at a college and started having a conversation. There was no business, there was no plan. It literally was just an idea. And that idea grew into a massive movement, a nonprofit that made an impact, and a business that did substantially well, all from that one act. And I think so many times people try and get to the business. They want a $10 million business instead of a one-day idea. And now, going back to bring it all back to your question, you can launch a one-day idea to an actual finished product, maybe 2 days, just by using the technology we have today. It could be as simple as, I'm going to do this one thing and send it out to the world, maybe give it away, maybe just start. One of my good friends has a massive newsletter that didn't start as a massive newsletter. It started as a commitment 3 years ago to post a newsletter originally every single week. And her consistency over 3 years is now her full-time income. But 3 years ago, that she couldn't have even thought of that. She was thinking maybe I could get some free stuff if some people subscribe. She started on Substack, so the entry was 0. And over 3 years' time, now has a income and substantial business from that newsletter, from the consistency.
Yep.
But if she hadn't, it's not the first newsletter. We've all written that one, right? We all do that first project. Yeah. It's the 5th one. It's the 10th one. It's the consistency. And I think you talked about that right before we started. It's what everyone underestimates about success is the longevity in front of it. Yep. And, and probably the failures in between. And I think that's the one thing now. You look at what's possible with AI, what's possible in the modern world with technology. It's not just a newsletter, you can launch an entire business in probably 24 hours.
Yep.
If you don't sleep.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, including a campaign, and spend $100 instead of going out to dinner and drinks on Friday. Use that money to see if you get a few leads.
Totally. And this is a great tie-in to a lot of different concepts that we've been talking about too. I think way too many people think they have to raise money before they ever get started. Getting started often shows you the path of what the next step is or how to pivot. And going back to a concept that I talked about earlier in the podcast of not suffering unnecessarily. It could be something. This is one of the things I despise about our industry is like the hustle culture and, you know, burn the boats. And if you have a plan B, you don't have a real plan A, and go all in, quit your job, go after your dream, start your business. I think that mindset prevents a lot of people from getting started, that they can't have a job and start their business, or they have their job and they're saving so that then they can start their business one day and go all in, and then they'll start it. Where what you just described is you just start a newsletter while you have your business. Take the income you have from your job and put some ads behind building more momentum behind your newsletter. Once you have an audience, it becomes a lot easier to launch a product. And so there's one of my favorite Tony Robbins quotes that I probably say on half of the episodes that's a perfect fit for this is just, we overestimate what we can accomplish in a year and underestimate what we can accomplish in 10. Absolutely. And just taking that time horizon and just looking at, okay, how can I, if you're listening to this podcast and you're working a day job and your goal is to, be an entrepreneur, how can you make that transition in the next 3 to 5 years versus, wishing every single day and being in your head that you're not what you're wanting to do every single day. There's a stair-step approach to go about that. And it doesn't have to be this all in, burn the boats mentality. So, do you have anything to add on that before I shift the conversation just a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. I was just going to say, the one thing about that makes it easier is when you love it.
Yeah.
Right. It's one of the things I'm kind of obsessed, I'm committed and obsessed with helping people figure out, is really knowing who they are, knowing what they want and what fires them up. Like, what brings you joy? If you don't know those things, now's the time to figure it out. And if you don't love it, you shouldn't be doing it. Like, none of it should feel like torture. Doesn't mean there's not going to be hard days, but I think you and I both would agree, when we're our most successful, we're actually doing the things that bring us joy. And it feels like a game, and it builds consistency. So that's the only thing I was going to say is, it's not about a grind. Sometimes you love it so much, you forget to do other things. If it feels like a grind, look at yourself, look in the mirror, and really have a conversation about who you are, what you really want. And I think it's as simple as writing down 3 things that you actually want and start with that. Create some motivation for yourself and an actual vision of what you truly want, because then it becomes a game and you're not suffering anymore.
Right.
You could fail, but failing at a game is just part of the game. There's so many stats in sports about the reality of failure of athletes, whether it's, some of the best hitters in the world, the best basketball players in the world miss half their shots, right? Yep. Baseball players, much worse than that. 200, 300 batting average, 20, 30%. They're on base, right?
You're failing 70 to 80% of the time.
Right.
Yeah.
It's consistent. I think golf's the only one, and they suffer. We all suffer with golf, but it's a consistent theme, but it's a game. So if you can shift your mind and make business that same, or your next startup or your next idea, and truly see it as a game, it totally shifts the mindset. And failure is just part of the process. Because you don't win a Super Bowl. The Rams aren't going to win the Super Bowl this year because they're undefeated. It's because they're going to be the best team at the end. That was a little plug for the Rams there.
I mean, the Broncos and the Broncos and the Rams in the same division. Man, I haven't followed football in a while, but I grew up in Denver, so I'm a Broncos fan. They're doing well this year. Got to give a shout out to my Broncos. I want to double click on that concept of joy, and I might be splitting hairs here, but is there a difference between happiness, joy, and fulfillment?
Yeah.
And what does that look like? I just know from my experience, even with what we're doing at personalbrand.com, I don't know that it really brings me happiness. I don't know that it really brings me joy, but it is deeply, deeply fulfilling. Mm-hmm. And that's what keeps me going. So, just double click on that concept of joy. I think there's this concept that is equally supportive and equally damaging of needing to monetize your passion, when there's also a freedom that comes with just recognizing a problem and an opportunity in the marketplace. And even if you're not passionate about it, pursuing that opportunity because it's something you're good at and it's something that can be lucrative, to then support a passion as well. So I see both sides of the coin, and this is something that I don't have a strong opinion on, but is a fun topic to unpack a little bit. So yeah, what is the difference between joy and happiness and fulfillment, and what's your take on monetizing your passion versus recognizing an opportunity and having the passion either be something that is synergistic with the business opportunity? For example, like having a philanthropic aspect to a profitable business, or kind of more of like a conscious capitalism type approach to business. Let's riff on that for a minute.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to be pretty brutally honest about it. I think passion projects are dangerous. I think the idea, and it was a trend for a good period of time, of like, find your passion and do that. That's not good advice, is basically my opinion. Only because I've seen so many people struggle with that. Like I said, I was running an agency back previously where my job was to launch people's businesses for them. And more times than not, their passion projects are the ones that suffered, because oftentimes they're too close emotionally to it. It's not that they're too close to it because they've been working on it for a decade. They're literally too close from it the day they start. They're just so passionate about it that they can't guide other people to do it. The best athletes aren't the best coaches always. I think that often comes true. So you're passionate about something doesn't mean you're the right person to lead someone through it, or that's what you should be doing with time. In fact, the opposite. Maybe it's what you should be doing to recharge. If you love painting, you don't have to start a painting channel, and you can if you want to run a channel. But I think people that are passionate about painting underestimate what it takes to run a channel.
Yeah.
More likely, you could be a lower quality painter and a good channel producer and love that process and have better success than the person passionate about painting that doesn't know how to produce a channel or find partners, right? That's another option. But I think that's a dangerous thing. I fall much more in the lines of find the lucrative thing and focus on more like the superpowers. So in our life, I think everyone has talents and skills that give them energy and give them joy, fulfillment, some version of that, and talents and skills that takes energy. And they're able to do it, but it doesn't give them any energy at all. It drains. Like, some people are introverts, some people are extroverts. Introverts get energy when they're alone and drain energy when they're in groups. Extroverts, exact opposite. And I think that's true in work. I think some people get energy doing strategy and planning and thinking through all the complex things and putting together, taking a strategy and turning it into a plan. That's kind of my world, right? I'm an architect. Like, that's my definition of purpose, is building something out of an idea and what that would look like. Other people, that's torture to them. To think at that point, like to think through that, they want to be the person that does something specific. And I think knowing what world you live in, some people just want to be on stage. They're high eyes from a disc profile, right? Knowing who you are, and disc profiles are a great way to learn it. Like, Tony's into that, and a lot of other people, Tony Robbins. But knowing who you are and what gives you energy is an important piece. So it's more that what I'm talking about. Like, do something that brings you joy to the point you get in flow. And I think flow is a real thing. 2 hours that feels like 10 minutes. 6 hours, it feels like an hour of work. That's flow. When you lose time versus feel like you worked for 40 hours and it's been 40 minutes, that's not so good.
Yeah.
That's more what I mean, is like find flow and then look for opportunity to leverage that.
Love it. Love it. This is one of the things that we help a lot of our clients and people that come through our workshops on the personalbrand.com side of things. Is it's really easy to assume that the gap between where we are and where we want to go comes from the things that we don't enjoy doing or things that we're not good at, and that we need to either do those things or solve those problems that we don't like solving in order to get to where we want to go. It's a very, logical explanation of that. And what I've found over the last, 15, 20 years of my entrepreneurship journey is that there's just so much gas left in the tank of just doing what you really enjoy to the nth level. Mm-hmm. And most people think that where they want to get to is doing something, for example, if you're an introvert and you don't like posting on social media, they think that in order to have business success, they just need to be posting on social media more. When in reality, if social media is something that drains your energy and it's like the bane of your existence, there's something else that's your superpower that you just need to lean into more to bridge that gap, to build some more momentum, to then hire somebody who can, do your social media for you. I'm one of those people. I post on social media when I have like inspired action. I am not consistent with it. And being the founder of personalbrand.com, like that's kind of a weird dynamic. But that's one of the reasons why I've started this podcast. Is I love having conversations with people. I love hearing people's stories. I love elevating other people. I'm a better advocate for other people than I am for myself. And so how do I put myself in a situation where we can have a conversation that then creates some social media content as a byproduct? So there's always some way to get around your weaknesses or get around your inclinations. Sometimes you have to develop a skill set that you don't want to develop. But in other ways, there's just ways to get creative and get resourceful in solving a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And you think about it, like, objections or that people might have is like, well, I can't pay other people. And that's why I think partnerships, when you're young, especially, are so powerful. Finding 3 people that each want to do something, find an opportunity, but then find your unique skill sets where between the 3 of you, you're dangerous. Versus a solo entrepreneur has to be really resourceful and probably put themselves through a lot of things that they don't want to do and will take longer. I think, if you're at that point, if you're 24 years old and you have an idea, but you don't want to be on social, there's an introvert out there that would love to stand in front of the camera. You don't have to pay them, but you should be partners with them, right? I'm a huge fan of partnerships, and I understand the complexities of them. Trust me, I've had my struggles through that process as well. Most partnerships break up, and the breakups aren't always very rarely are they amiable, right? But the potential, especially when you're young, to connect with someone who has resources you need to provide the resources you have is such a fast track to you solving everything. Whether that's as simple as just finding someone who has the financial resources and an idea and being the person to make it happen behind their scenes, which is typically what I did when I was young, or actually, like we're talked about, launching something where there's an introvert who is the forward facing and an extrovert who makes sure that all the things happen and they happen on time. There's like skill sets like that. So yeah, I think it's a huge opportunity. On
that partnership opportunity, I've had some really bad business partnerships, and I have a great business partnership with Jeremy and Jonathan, and I'm in business with my wife. I know that you've been in business with your wife too, so I want to talk about business partnerships and also life partnership, marriage as well. Just your journey through being your entire journey of those early days of working 18, 20-hour days for years, and this entire trajectory. I also want to touch on the personal side a little bit and any lessons you have for young guys and gals out there. But on the business side, partnerships, I hear you when you say, you have your skill set, what you're bringing to the table, and what other kind of, some of those are very logical or objective things, but what are some of the intangible things that you look for in a partnership before you fully commit, or what's a deal breaker, or even if it's partnerships that you've seen from afar, what is that recipe? Because business partnerships, like you mentioned, it's way easier said than done. So what are some tips that you have for people of how do you find a good partner in business, and what do you look out for?
Yeah. It might be not, my advice might not be the most popular. And my wife doesn't even like this advice when I explain it to her. But I'll be honest, the lesson I've learned, and it's been a lesson I've had to learn, is your business partners are not your friends. They're your business partners. Even if you're decades of business partners, realizing, and they could be your friends too, but realizing when you're business partners, you're business partners. Now, obviously, you mentioned I've been business partners with my wife, and that's a different story. And I'll get into that a little bit. But honestly, that's the first piece. You just really have to set that expectation, because you have to prepare yourself every time. I just had a conversation not too long ago about a partnership, and it's so easy to think about the good parts of the partnership. You have to think about the breakup. You don't start a partnership without planning the breakup. What does that look like? And you have to approach it to know that eventually it probably will end. Even if you both end, if there's an exit, it's not a breakup, but you exit. The company's, you're done. You're no longer there. If you sell your company to a private equity company, within 3 years, you will not be at that company. That's the reality. That's the statistics, right? So that's the first thing. And again, it's probably not the most popular, because inevitable, you end up spending so much time together that you become friends, and your families become friends. And there's a hard breakup. I will, without going into specifics, I've vacationed with most of my business partners. I've gone on multiple vacations with, and trips with, and spent lots of time with, and still love them all, but never friends. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like friends at the time, but not the friends like my best friend, who I was business partners for a little bit, but who I call every day and check on and have that kind of relationship. And I think it's just a different thing. So that's the first thing. And then to unravel the spouse part a little bit, that one's much harder. And I think it's harder. I think it's hard in general, but being willing to divide the business and personal is an important piece. I don't know if you've kind of found that as well, but if you bring work home, that's when problems start. And even if you work from home, having those times, having meetings during normal hours and having conversations just like you would a business partner. So it's that division of, when we're working, I'm going to treat you like a partner in the business. And when we're not working, we don't go on date night and talk about the business. If I have something to talk to you, I'll make an appointment and we'll have a conversation and we'll have a meeting about it. And it might be at lunch, it might be at dinner, but it'll be clear that's what it is. Mm-hmm. So that's the number one thing that Molly and I learned along the way and it took us time to learn it. And we learned it from some friends and mentors through the process of what worked for them. So this isn't anything we invented, but really figuring out how to divide it so that we didn't feel like we were always working together when we were together. That was the number one thing.
Do you have any tips for people as parents throughout the entrepreneurship journey? I mean, you're from, being married at a young age, being a father at a young age, going through these rapid scale seasons, starting companies, playing a critical role in the growth of these companies. How do you manage that work-life balance of, giving the business everything that it demands of you, and then also, being a great husband and a great father?
Yeah. My answer is different now than it has ever been before. And it's actually how I run my team. So if you work with me, if you're on one of my teams and we're working together, and I hear that you missed a kids event, specifically a larger event, I'll actually call you out. There's only a few things I regret in my life. And majority of them are things I missed that my kids had. And the way I explain it to people is as ridiculous as it sounds, that 8-year-old recital that your daughter or son is in only happens once ever. It is a unique moment in time that is impossible to reproduce. And so you underestimate how important, not just to you, but to your kids, that one moment is. And I spent probably 10 years at least making that mistake, at least. And it wasn't till, and slowly learned it, but it wasn't until my son was about 12, I made the conscious decision that I would never miss another major event. I wasn't their coach all the time. I didn't go to every practice, although I tried to, honestly. I definitely didn't sit and watch my daughter take dance lessons every time, but I never missed a recital. I never missed a performance. My son is now a musician. I didn't miss his shows until he told me to stop going when he was like 20. And that's my number one thing. Like everything else, I think is fine. Kids know when you love them. For fathers of daughter, I recommend the book Strong Fathers, Strong Fathers, Strong Daughters. It's an amazing book. Kind of talks about those concepts, but I think everything else is figure outable, again, to use that concept. But missed moments are the one thing that make critical difference.
Awesome. Great insight. You mentioned one piece, looping back to your partnership with your best friend. I'm going back to the very beginning of the podcast. That is something that I want to double click on. You mentioned that when you were working with your best friend, that he was too good of a salesperson and brought in too business. And one of the things I always say, and I usually don't have as tangible of an example, is that there's two things that break a business: not enough business and too much business. So for those of us that might have a hard time comprehending a real world scenario where having too much business was actually detrimental, can you tell us just a little bit of a few insights around that time, that season, that business, and why that was such a problem?
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, it makes sense theoretically, especially in services or agencies. There's two sides of every business. There's sales and fulfillment. And if you're not structured in a way, and it was my first time running an agency. I'd worked for agencies, so I thought I had it all figured out. But you don't understand, working in something and running something are two magical, like massively different things. And so I, being the one responsible for fulfillment, completely my fault, also the majority owner of the company, underestimated the scale required to fulfill on the sales, and honestly underestimated his ability. And so, and which would have been fine probably, and we could have figured it out, but the compensation structure wasn't structured in a way that allowed us, that didn't work well for him. Again, my fault. So you have to learn how to say no is the right answer, right? It's like, and not just to your sales team, but to your customers. And that's the hardest part. I think it's still the hardest part. I think now, if I look at the last 4 or 5 years of my life, I've said no or quickly broken up with customers as often as I said yes, if not more, honestly. And I think that's the other thing is a rapid no. We'd love to work with you, but we just don't have capacity right now. Or, we appreciate the opportunity to work with you, but we've discovered that you're not the right fit for us. Mm-hmm. Those kind of conversations so that your business can scale and you don't crush it. Because the other side of that was crushing your team, managing beyond your capacity, burning out your team, and then things really fall apart. So that's the other side of that is don't drive your team past its capacity.
Yeah, that's a huge theme of things that I've been on the excess capacity receiving end of that, being on the team where, businesses that either was consulting for or directly involved in, the business was dependent on the team operating at 100 or 110% capacity and ongoing, and that's just not sustainable. And I think the sweet spot is knowing the capacity of your team, and then finding that sweet spot of 85 to 90%, so you can handle these spikes. And there's excess capacity in the business where the business isn't 100% dependent on your team constantly on the edge of burnout, over delivering 100% of the time. It's a difficult thing to do because there's a season in the business where that is required to get the momentum, but it can't be the way that it is designed to operate ongoing.
Yeah. I mean, you say that, but that's required for the business owner. And I think that's an important piece to remember. First of all, like I said, I don't recommend now in hindsight that even entrepreneurs or business owners burn themselves out. I've never recommended rinse and repeat what I did, and that's the path to success. I don't think lack of sleep is ever the path to success. I think 7 hours of sleep is a critical part of planning. I think exercise 5 days a week is a critical part of your life and success. And I've figured out that balance. But more importantly, if you have a team and you're driving them to that capacity with you, that's not, I don't want to say it's not ethical, because that's up to them. It's something I don't believe in passionately. And I would tell anyone that's currently working in a place, if they're driving you past capacity and expecting you to work at a level that they're working at as business owners, and they happen to be the type of business owner that wants to work 18 hours a day, that's not the right place. Mm-hmm. You're getting taken advantage of, especially if you're salary. Like, I'm not giving employee advice for sure, and I want to disclaim that. Like, I'm not a lawyer or anything like that, but really learning how to run a team at capacity and not above is a skill. It's a skill that I've worked 30 years to master, and I'm proud of, and I see it abused too many times. And that's the thing I'd tell people: if you're in an environment that's expecting more than your capacity, and it's costing you time with your family that's more beyond reasonable, or time away from your kids and their events because of expectations, it's probably not a healthy environment. That, on the flip side of that, I do want to say, I definitely see the opposite side of that. And I see people with unrealistic expectations of working 4 to 6 hours a day and travel not being an okay thing for them. And so there is this fine, I obsess and commit overly to every company and partner and business I've ever been in, but I also respect everyone's time. And I know, most important is family, your marriage and your kids, because, especially looking back, eventually they're gone. So there's a balance there, even as business owners.
Yeah, for sure. I want to segue the conversation into a little bit about what you're up to now and new projects that you're starting. And it might be a good segue on the balance side of this entire entrepreneurial journey, and just learning a little bit more about what fuels you and maybe your faith journey along the way. How does that incorporated into your success?
Sure. I'd love to. My relationship with God has been as varied over time as my relationship with my business partners, to be honest. And I found an interesting thing along the way that really has, again, I think over the last 10 years, but even more in the last 5, has just become so pure and true, is that the closer I am, I don't want to say the better things are, but it sure feels that way. And the further I get away, the more likely he is to remind me that I'm away. Is the bluntest version I could say of that. Right. So I'm not quick to learn. So these are repeated processes where eventually God's pulled me back to him by hook more often than a little pat, where I get ripped out of something.
Natalie calls them spiritual 2x4s.
Yeah, there you go.
Like a little whisper at first, but you don't get it. Then they just get knocked upside the head.
Across the head.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that. So I've gotten my fair bit of 2x4s across the head, and just learned to be more present and listen to God and be as honest as I can with him first. And as I've done that, I really have learned to have honest conversations, not just with myself, but other people, and go back to those questions that I talked about. If you don't know who you are, you don't know what you want. And, my wife and I always joke about the movie The Notebook and, the screaming, what do you want? And I think so many people struggle with that. Entrepreneurs for sure. And that's what I work with. I really work with people to unlock what they truly want, because we get so caught up in chasing what we think we need and what we think other people want to see in us, instead of truly admitting what we want. And once you do that, once you admit what you actually want, you can be truly honest with yourself. It becomes so much easier to be honest with everyone else. And all the things, I don't want to say hiding, all the things you don't talk about, all the things that you don't hope they don't find out, or, and it's not dark things, it's just things you'd rather not talk about or you don't want to focus on, all those go away. And that's what I'm obsessed with right now, is really helping specifically entrepreneurs go beyond their business and truly figure out what they want in their life, and helping them achieve more in business, but also more in life. And whether that's experience, whether that's an exit, whether that's literally just more time because they're still on that 20-hour-a-week grind. They don't know how to get out of it. A lot of the men I work with and women feel like they're holding everything on their shoulders as entrepreneurs. And that's because they've self-inflicted that into their lives by taking on responsibilities and not knowing how to let things go. And it's just this vicious circle that I've seen so many times. So that's what I'm doing. I work a lot, mostly one-on-one as, again, partners in business. But I work at a different level. And I work with men or women, either one, mostly men, that are entrepreneurs and know what they want financially or in their business, but also helping them unlock where they are emotionally and what they want personally and the things they won't say.
That's so critically important. What I found is that oftentimes people are a lot closer to what they actually want than they realize. And we have these arbitrary or artificial financial milestones that we think we need to reach, when oftentimes we're much closer to that reality that we think we are. I also hear there might be a podcast in the works.
There is conversation of a podcast.
All right.
I didn't know I was going to commit to it on the show.
You don't have to.
No, for sure.
Yes.
I want to spend time talking to people and learning about how, similar to my faith journey, what's brought them to where they are and really brought them to the point where they are in their current lives, and ask those questions. Like, where are you on your faith? Where are you as a person? What do you really want? And where are you trying to go? And have these real raw conversations and discover, hopefully, something new about people that your average, I shouldn't say average. I won't even say typical. Your more tactical focused podcast or interview typically wouldn't ask these conversations, to take them out of their business conversation or out of their whatever current topic, and have a different conversation about them, their lives, their faith, and say things probably they don't want to hear, but also encourage them and talk about, lessons along the way.
Awesome. I have a pretty profound story that I'd love to unpack on your podcast if and when it's appropriate, and it'd be a good opportunity for my audience to learn that side of my story, as well as, try to tell as much of my story on this show without overshadowing the guest. But my faith journey has played a critical role in my entrepreneurial path and success, and the struggles and the frustration along the way, all being the fodder for my relationship with God and with Jesus. And so those conversations, I think, are very timely. I think people are hungry for those. I think the intersection of business and faith is something that people have steered away from, trying to intertangle those two topics for a long time. But I really do believe that this next generation of leaders, people are going to be looking for leaders that are grounded in something bigger than just the financial success or the Lambo in the garage. And so I'm really excited to see that project come to fruition. For those of you, for those listening out there who might have an interest in working with you, how can people get into contact with you, or how can people reach out to learn more about how you support entrepreneurs?
Yeah. So the best place to go is ludarilife.com. And that's where you can kind of learn more about the journey and how to work with me specifically and what that would look like.
Cool. We'll have links down below on this episode. So with that being said, Kevin Richards, thanks so much for joining me on the Six Fig Podcast.
Thanks, man. It's been amazing.